Let me share my screen.
I think we would be out in.
Hey, it's fresh in here, no? Yes. More fresh.
Okay. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So thank you very much for having me. I'm Carolina, as you all know, and I'm going to be presenting a little bit of my PhD project, which is titled Parental Interoception, Uncovering Parents' Capacity to Read Children's Bodily Signals. And I'm supervised by Professor Katerina Fotopoulou and also Dr. Elena Panagiotopoulou. And I've had to practice these last names to be able to say them. Great. So what I'm going to be presenting is I'll just start with the overall aim of the project, then give you a little bit of background, and then I'll present some of my PhD chapters. So I'll go into more detail for this. So developing a self-report measure of parental interoception, just because I have the most progress on this. So I'll focus on this a lot. And then I'll also give you a sneak peek of kind of assessing parental interoception via subjective and psychophysiological tools, which is kind of the main chapter of my PhD, which I'm still working on. So I'm still doing some data analysis, but I can give you kind of a sneak peek into that. So the overall aim of the project is to investigate parents' ability to identify and respond to their children's interoceptive signals and states, and how this ability might relate to their parents' own physiological state, their own interoceptive abilities, and other related psychosocial factors. And to give you a bit of background, so what is interoception? So interoception has been defined in many ways, but let's say that it is the processing, representation, and awareness of internal bodily signals across different modalities, like cardiac, gastric, respiratory, etc. And it has been used also as an umbrella term, so it can include neurobiological and psychological facets that happen at different levels of the neurocognitive hierarchy. So it can include like afferent signals, central processing, neural representations, but also mental representations and feelings about the body. And on some definitions, interoception includes signals and sensations that originate from within the body, but also from within its boundaries, so the skin. So for example, affective touch, pain, and temperature can also be considered as interoceptive signals. And also interoception plays a crucial role in homeostasis, given that the interoceptive signals inform the brain of the physiological conditions of the body, like insulin, oxygen, pH, etc. And this helps the body kind of guide regulation, decisions, and actions. And I'll come back a little bit to this later. I don't think I will notice if anyone kind of raises their hand, so if you can just let me know, because I cannot see it on my screen.
Yeah, we'll just shout out, Carolina, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Great, and then also, so why is interoception so important? There are many things that it has been related to, but one of the things that I want to focus on is that research has found that interoception is important for emotional process, including regulating emotions. And there is neurobiological evidence of this, and it comes from two kind of main findings. One of which is that there is an overlap between the kind of neuroanatomical substrates that underlie interoceptive function and bodily processes they overlap with the neuroanatomical substrates that underlie emotional experiences. And then the other main finding is kind of there is a temporal covariation of physiological changes and changes in affective experience. So for example, if participants are doing a task that evokes certain emotions, they will have changes in their physiology as well. And another thing is that physiological measures are used a lot in emotion regulation research, and mainly in two ways. So one is as outcome measures. So basically, big emotions are known to kind of activate the sympathetic nervous system. So for example, increasing your heart rate. So essentially a good or an effective emotion regulation strategy should work to decrease the SNS activation. So this is how one of the ways that physiological measures are used in emotion regulation research. And also another way is that they use physiological measures to kind of understand the underlying mechanisms of the emotion regulation process. And in this case, it's more about the parasympathetic nervous system. So measures, for example, of heart rate variability, respiratory sinus arrhythmia, they are used as kind of proxy to the vagal tone, which is kind of considered to be associated with emotion regulation capacity. I hope that makes sense. And then there's also
Carolina,
evidence linking. Yes.
Sorry, can you just be a bit more? Are there any more specific findings you can talk about that? Because you know the kind of the literature on vagal tone and emotion regulation has always struck me as very vague. That Porges makes these very kind of big claims about a functional significance of vagal tone, based
Yes.
on some correlation evidence that's quite inconsistent in quite a lot of ways, isn't it? So when you were talking about that, as a mechanism through which emotion regulation happens, as opposed to just a correlate. So what were the specific findings that you were thinking of here?
Yes, you are right. Like the literature, there's a lot of literature around this, and I cannot kind of put everything into here. And maybe there are some, you're right in that sometimes it can be very vague and it's just correlational. But for example, research into respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which I think I have some examples here. So for example, respiratory sinus arrhythmia increases during negative emotion tasks. And this is taken to indicate kind of effortful emotion regulation. But again, you might be right, that is kind of like a big assumption. And
yeah,
I think there's
this idea, the removal of the vagal brake is something that they talk about. But because sometimes when they find that there's more respiratory science than rhythm, they take that as evidence that more emotion regulation has happened, and then when they find the opposite, they say, well, in that case, it must just be that. Do you see what I mean? It's just the causality is just quite hard to infer from those types of studies.
Yes, I agree. I don't think I have any like specific example that could point out to causality. There are other examples of like kind of associating RSA levels during negative emotion with trait level kind of emotion regulation deficits. But again, I don't think this is what you're looking for.
I have a question also
Yes.
about interoceptive accuracy. So, do you mean, so if I'm sitting here, I can tell you if I'm at my normal temperature or if I'm hotter than usual or colder than usual, but I couldn't tell you like a physical number of what my body temperature would be. So when you're looking at accuracy, is it from a baseline, which is very subjective, or is it like a numerical accuracy of, something is say 2 meters away? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So interoceptive accuracy does kind of refer to the objective detection of your internal bodily sensations. Of course, I don't think anybody would be like 100% exact. And most of the measures that exist now are based on like the cardiac modality. There's also some measures for respiratory modalities and gastric modalities that I've heard from. I don't know if anybody else knows others. I haven't heard anything about temperature, but that would be interesting. But yeah, it's basically like the objective detection of your bodily signals. And then interoceptive sensibility would be kind of your self-reported beliefs about your internal bodily state. Does that make sense? Did it answer a little bit your question?
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, so down here where I say like there is also evidence linking emotion regulation to direct measures of interoception. Most of these kind of, for example, this example, better interoceptive accuracy and sensibility are associated with effective use of emotion regulation strategies. So most of these are measured by kind of the cardiac modality and sensibility. Interoceptive sensibility is measured usually with questionnaires. Okay, shall I move on from this? Okay, so how are interoceptive abilities developed and what is kind of the role of the parents? There are a handful of studies now that have looked for evidence of interoceptive abilities early in life. And here I took this figure from the paper just to explain a little bit the kind of the paradigm or the experiment that they use. So they use this sequential looking paradigm with eye tracking with infants, and they show them some animated figures that are either in sync or out of sync with their own heartbeat or their breathing. And then kind of they look at the infant's looking preference. So if they look more to the asynchronous versus the synchronous stimuli, it kind of it's taken to mean that they have some sensitivity to their cardiac and respiratory interoceptive signals. And so these few studies have found that infants as young as 5 months old show this sensitivity. So they prefer looking at the asynchronous versus the synchronous stimuli.
I'm sorry, Carolina, can I ask you a question? Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've seen, and I need to read way more about this because I find it really interesting, but I've just read a little bit. There's this literature about like the link between saccades, like visual saccades, and heartbeats, and I think you're more likely to saccade during the systolic phase of the cardiac cycle, I think. If I'm wrong about that, let me know. And that's thought to be maybe something to do with like managing an increase in like noise during systole. So I wonder like if there's some connection, or are you aware if there's some connection in the thinking between like you're more likely to attend to a stimulus that's out of sync with your cardiac cycle, maybe just because you're more likely to fixate during those times or something like that? Or is there some link between fixation and this stuff?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't have an answer. But yeah, there are a few studies looking specifically at systole and diastole kind of intervals, but I wouldn't know how to answer. It's an interesting question. I don't know if anybody else has input.
Can I ask a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, of course.
But it will be beyond your question.
It's okay.
Sorry. So in this experiment, did they look at the baseline levels of the infants? Like, is there any difference in depending on the state of the infant while looking at the images in the screen? Does it make sense? Because if they are highly aroused or not so aroused, are they attending to those that are similar to their interoceptive signals still?
Yes, so I think I would have to look at the paper to know exactly like the baseline measures and all of this, but the two kind of stimuli. So one of the conditions is where it's asynchronous with their own heart rate or breathing. So for example, if we're talking about the heart rate, they would measure the infant's heart rate and display kind of the little animated figure that moves in synchrony with their baby's own heartbeat. And then the other condition would be out of sync with their own heartbeat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I'll look that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. So there is some evidence of interoceptive abilities early in life, but this still doesn't explain kind of the underlying mechanisms of how interoception is developed. And if interoceptive abilities are shaped by the same factors that we know influence emotion regulation development, such as parental sensitivity, mentalization, etc. And I will talk a little bit about this. Okay, so how does interoception develop? Because infants are dependent on their parents to maintain homeostasis. So for example, infants need their parent or caregiver to regulate their hunger, to regulate their sleep, their body temperature, etc. So some theoretical frameworks have made the proposition that parents actually play a crucial role in the development of interoception. And whilst there is no kind of direct evidence yet of this, there is some indirect support from evidence in related research. So I have kind of summarized 3 main areas of research. Of course, the literature around all of this is very, very huge, and I cannot go into detail on all of these, but basically we know that parents influence the children's physiological regulation. So for example, both like parental behavior such as affective touch can decrease the infant's SNS activity, so slow down their heart rate or increase blood oxygenation levels, etc. But also the parent's own physiology can influence the child's physiology, and there are different kind of terms for these, like synchrony, co-regulation, contagion, etc. And again, there's a whole lot of literature around synchrony and all of this that I cannot go into detail now. And then we also know that the parents' kind of reading of children's mental state is important for their cognitive and social emotional development. And I know this is a big kind of generalization, but this has been investigated through different concepts. And I mentioned a few here, like parental reflective functioning, parental embodied mentalizing, maternal sensitivity, mind-mindedness, parental insightfulness. And although all of these constructs kind of refer to specific parental capacities, what kind of underlies, or what I think underlies, is the capacity of the parent to see their child as an independent kind of human being with their own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, intentions, and their own desires. And there's a lot of research around all of these concepts and how they relate to the children's outcomes and development of social abilities, emotional abilities, and cognitive abilities as well. And then the other thing is parental, kind of more directly related a little bit. There's been some evidence, there are a few studies of parental interoceptive abilities related to children's developmental outcomes. So for example, there was one study that showed mother's interoceptive knowledge. So this is they describe this as the mother's understanding about how the body feels during different kind of subjective states. So, for example, my heart races when I am excited. And this knowledge predicted children's emotion regulation and social skills. But again, there's just a few studies with this type of kind of evidence.
I have a question about, can you back right there? So number one, where it says parents influence children's physiological regulation. Are there any studies that have compared adults to their pets? So some of the studies that we've had presented, that with the dyad, with the sounds, it's compared to monkeys. But I know my dog regulates to me all the time.
Yeah. I think I just saw the other day one study. I think my supervisor was collaborating on one of these where they saw how dogs kind of regulated people. I don't remember exactly.
But vice versa, if I'm in a bad mood, my dog's in a bad mood.
Yeah.
So
it could be
they use
both ways.
co-regulate.
Reciprocal.
And
That would be interesting.
And can I just ask you a question for Lena? So, obviously, for one, you can look at kind of temporal precedents for that type of thing to get at causality. But for 2 and 3, for these papers, obviously there's the big, the spinach factor. So the parents who are just generally better educated and have more time for their children, and that type of thing, will score higher on these types of measures, and their children will also score higher on cognitive and social and emotional development outcome measures, which might be causally to do with this. It might be to do with those families also tend to have more books in the home, or watch their screens, or eat more spinach, or anything like that. So what, in terms of specific evidence for specific causal associations between these different things, what do you know, just out of interest, whether there's evidence that's tried to look at it in a more fine-grained way?
I think this is one of the reasons that I'm going to explain a little bit after like my methods, but not that I know of. So most of the evidence is correlational, and I haven't seen anybody trying to look at actually like directly or a causal way of how parents kind of notice and respond to the children's interoceptive signals. But yeah, I cannot think off the top of my head of any like causal or evidence or any study that demonstrates this in this way. But yeah, so to do a quick recap, we saw that interoception plays a crucial role in homeostasis, and it's assumed to be associated with emotion regulation. We saw there is some evidence of interoceptive abilities in infancy, and there are some theoretical propositions with some indirect support that suggest that parents play a crucial role in the development of interoception. However, there is no direct empirical evidence, and also we lack the instruments to measure this, so to measure how parents read or notice and how they respond to their children's interoceptive signals and states, which is what I call parental interoception. So this is kind of where I start from. Any other questions before I move on to the next section? Okay, so I'm gonna talk about this. This is one of my PhD chapters where I developed parental interoception questionnaire. So basically the main aim was to develop and validate, or kind of do an initial validation of a questionnaire that could measure parental interoception. And as a self-report measure, of course, it's intended to evaluate the more conscious aspects of interoception, so the sensibility dimension. And also it reflects parents' perspective on their ability, and it's not an objective or behavioral measure of this capacity. And as a disclaimer, there are a lot of details in each of the phases in the study that I'm not gonna go into today, but if you are interested and you wanna see all of the details, there is a preprint available. So you can find it, I put the reference there. And also another disclaimer, there might be some changes, of course, to the paper after we go through the peer review process. So just keep in mind that. So basically, this study was divided in 3 phases. The first phase was item development, in which we generated the items and we evaluated content validity. Second phase was scale development, which was the main aim was to obtain kind of the factor structure of the questionnaire. And then scale evaluation was to do a confirmatory factor analysis, evaluate construct validity, and reliability as well. So I'll start with the phase 1. So the item generation process, we didn't start from scratch. So the initial pool of items was based on the MEA questionnaire, which is a multidimensional assessment of interoceptive awareness questionnaire. And we adapted the items. So for example, if the item was, I notice when I'm uncomfortable in my body, then we would adapt it to kind of capture the parental interoception aspect. So I notice when my child is uncomfortable in their body. And then we also examined other self-report measures of interoception, like the body awareness questionnaire, interoceptive sensitivity questionnaire, and also other measures of parental abilities or parent-child relationships, like the one example is the parental reflective functioning questionnaire, but there is a big list of measures that were examined. So after this, we generated more items, and these are kind of the soft skills that we had. And then, so with these 72 items, we evaluated content validity, first with expert ratings. So 11 experts in the fields of neuroscience and child development and clinical psychology. They gave us their ratings. So they rated each of the items according to their relevance for the subscale and according to the clarity. And they also provided some qualitative feedback. So this table shows the content validity ratio scores, and it shows how many items had a low score. So this is the cutoff point. 0.62 is the cutoff point for 10 raters or more. So we can see like some of the subscales had some items that needed to be revised. Maybe they weren't clear enough or they felt that they weren't relevant. And then from the qualitative feedback from experts, there was kind of one main theme, which was we needed to use clearer and simpler language. So no jargon, maybe adding examples for difficult terms, and be a bit clearer on the definition of things. So these are some examples of the comments. And then we did a small field test. So 9 parents answered the questionnaire, and they provided also scores on relatedness and importance. So how much they could relate the item to their own parenting experience and how important they thought that the item was. And they also gave some qualitative feedback. So overall, the relatedness and importance scores were good. But we did get some feedback on need to clarify what bodily sensations and signals mean. And this was kind of a repeated comment from parents. So then we revised the questionnaire, we revised all of the items and the soft skills, and we reduced, so we deleted, for example, some items that were not clear enough, if there was repetition, and other items were kind of modified to have simpler language, to include some examples as well. So we reduced to 49 items, and we also added a brief description at the beginning of the key terms, so parents would know what we mean by bodily sensations and body signals.
Carolina, can I just ask?
Yes.
So there's two things, which is one is what is my child actually feeling, and the other is what's my child communicating with me. Yeah, so my daughter had a insect bite on her foot this morning, and I wouldn't have had an idea that she had an insect bite, but she kept on saying, I've got a bite, it's itchy, it's itchy, itchy. So how did you look at that? Were you looking at, because obviously that's not an issue when you're actually looking at interoception of your own bodily signals. So how did you get over this? Were they feeling it or are they communicating it? Because the other thing is obviously that would change a lot with the age of the children.
Yes, so I think we wanted the items to reflect what the parents believe that the children are actually feeling. But of course, if you're trying to guess what somebody else is feeling, there will be ways in which it will be communicated. So also the questionnaire includes some items on like, if parents think that the body signals are communicating important things to them, and if they trust these kind of body signals to communicate things. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit.
So does a bodily signal mean a signal that is happening in the absence of a more overt behavioral expression of? So like if I'm distressed, I have an interoceptive state of being distressed, but then if I'm also crying, is that?
Yeah.
Are there two different things? Like you're asking them, do you know if they're distressed when they're not actually expressing distress, but they look like, because one is a harder task than the other is.
Yes, of course. I don't know if there's a way to actually separate these things. But what we're asking is if they, of course not if they know, because we never know. But how much they think they know what the child is feeling. And I wouldn't say separate from the behavior, because of course the behavior communicates things, but we're not focusing on the behavior. So we're not asking, oh, like if your child is crying, do you know why they are crying? This is not what we were interested in. It's more about if you notice, for example, an increased heart rate, and it's important also to link it to emotions and feelings and behaviors. So we also have, I think you will see one of the soft skills will be linking soft skills. So do I know how my child's body reacts when they are feeling joyful, or when they are feeling sad, or when they are feeling stressed? So what do the body signals communicate? That's also part of the questionnaire. I don't know if I'm answering your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope so. It makes sense.
Oh, sorry, can I ask for that? Sorry,
Yes.
I interrupted you. I guess I don't know that much about questionnaire development, and I'm curious about like, because obviously being responsive to your child is like a sort of, it's an ideal parenting thing for Western people mostly. Like we all want to be responsive to our children, and we're all really aware of the body also. So how do you, when you're doing something like this, how do you, I guess, correct for social desirability bias? because I'm never going to say if someone asks me, no, I'm not responsive to my kid, even if maybe I am, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I think you mentioned something important as well, that of course we have developed this questionnaire and kind of done an initial validation in a sample of kind of British people or people that live in England or in the UK. So if you want to use the questionnaire somewhere else, of course, or with different demographics, of course you would need to do further validation tests. But also the desirability, I think it's always present in when you do questionnaires. I think this was all done online, so maybe it can help a little bit. You don't have kind of the researcher next to you kind of looking at your answers. And it was also a big, okay, this part, it wasn't, so the field test, it was small, but then I'm gonna explain the rest of the cases. But yeah, I think there's always this, so self-report measures always have their limitations, of course.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm gonna move on to the second phase. For this phase, we recruited a big sample, and it was done through Prolific, so it was all online. And the idea was to kind of examine the psychometric properties of the questionnaire and kind of arrive at a robust factor structure. So we did some descriptive analysis, item analysis, with the idea of pruning the items. And then we did exploratory factor analysis, and we refined the questionnaire at the end. So we had 601 participants. I have a few of the some of the demographic information here. We did, so with Prolific, you can choose to do kind of a balance sample. So we tried to do a balance in gender. So we had 45% female. And the mean age was 36. Most of the participants were white. And yes, so the first thing, we looked at descriptive statistics and we performed item analysis. So with descriptives, we looked at.
Question.
Yes.
Were you interested in the ages of their children?
Yes, sorry, I didn't mention this. So this was parents with children 0 to 10 years old. And I haven't included this part here in my presentation, but you can see in the preprint if you're interested. We had two different versions at the beginning. We had a baby version and a child version. So it was 0 to 3 years old, 3-year-olds, and then up to 10-year-olds, 4 to 10-year-olds. So yes, thank you for that question. Yeah, so then.
I'm sorry, Carolina. Sorry, could I ask one more question? Is that okay? Sorry.
Yes, of course.
Well, the stuff in the background was mostly about like maternal responsiveness to infants, and I guess the mum is usually the primary caregiver. So is there a reason you included men in the sample at all?
Yes, so I've always wanted to include the fathers in my studies, because like you say, most of the research on these kind of topics, it's mostly with mothers, but I think it's important to also know kind of the role of fathers, if there are any differences or not. So I always wanted to include them as well. So if for example, if I only included mothers in this, then the questionnaire kind of would not be validated for fathers. And I wouldn't want kind of people not to be able to use it with fathers as well.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so all of the items were analyzed, and have some kind of criteria to kind of prune the items. So items with high skewness or kurtosis levels were eliminated. And then with item analysis, we get the total correlation score and the reliability index. So also items with low scores here were removed. And the total correlation score is basically the correlation of the item with the total test score. And the reliability index is just how much the item contributes to the total score variance. And then, so after removing those items, I did exploratory factor analysis. And also the idea here was to kind of remove any psychometrically weak items and arrive to kind of a robust structure. So I didn't include here all of the details, but basically I did a few rounds of exploratory factor analysis, and this final result was the third round, where I got good factor loadings for all of the items, and it kind of made sense theoretically as well. So I got 5 factors, and the number of factors, kind of, I looked at different things. I looked at eigenvalues, I looked at the script plot, but ultimately I used the parallel analysis to determine the number of factors. And this is what we arrived at. So 5 factors, which are attention, epistemic attitudes, trust, regulation, and linking. And you can see some examples of the items here. And here you can also see the factor loadings and the correlations between the factors. Sorry. Okay, so after this, I revised the questionnaire, made sure that everything kind of made sense, and I made a few modifications. So for example, I added some items to the regulation subscale, just because in the end, this subscale ended up with just 2 items, and this could negatively affect the internal reliability of the subscale. So I decided to add a few items, and also the linking subscale ended up with only some negatively worded items. So I added other positively worded items to this subscale. So the final version was 24 items and the 5 subscales that I mentioned. And then I moved on to the third phase, in which I did confirmatory factor analysis. I evaluated construct validity and test-retest reliability. So for this phase, I recruited a new sample, also done through Prolific, so all online. This sample was 511 parents, 50% female, and similar kind of demographics, also mostly white, and mean age 36. And because everything was online, I used other self-report measures, so only self-report measures. So I used the MEA and the BAQ, which is the body awareness questionnaire, to measure interoceptive sensibility. And then for other psychosocial factors, I used the difficulties in emotion regulation scale, experiences in close relationships, to measure attachment. And then for mental health symptoms, I used the DAS, so it's the depression, anxiety, and stress scale. And I also measured somatic symptoms with the PHQ. And then for parental abilities, I used the parental reflective functioning questionnaire. And for the children's kind of psychological state, I used the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. So lots of measures. Okay, so first I will start with confirmatory factor analysis. These are the fit indices, and they suggest that the model had a good fit. And all of the factors were correlated between each other, and these are the internal reliability, so alpha values for each subscale. As you can see, there is room for improvement in some of them. So for example, the regulation subscale could be a bit higher on internal reliability. But overall, it seemed like a good fit for other. And then, so moving on to the construct validity, there were a few significant associations with demographic features. So for example, I did find gender differences. So women scored higher than men, a little bit. And also there was an employment effect. So people that were not working or that were only working part-time had higher scores than people who were working full-time. And then looking at the other questionnaires, so there were positive correlations with interoceptive sensibility, both in the with the BAQ and with the MEA. And with the psychosocial traits, there were negative correlations with emotion regulation difficulties and with avoidant attachment style. But there were no significant correlations with other traits. So for example, not with anxious attachment or with any of the mental health symptoms or the somatic symptoms either.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Why do you think there wasn't a significant relationship in terms of the negative correlation with anxious attachment?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember what the logic was here, because there are some other studies that have looked at the relationship between interoception and attachment, and they have found similar results. So sometimes there's a mix of results here, is what I want to say. So sometimes they find that the anxious kind of attachment style is related to higher interoceptive abilities. Sometimes it's the other way around. So there is kind of a mix in results there. But I think
I'm just throwing it out there, but there can be maybe a positive correlation with anxious attachment and actually a negative correlation when you only look at regulation. Because regulation was the least loaded factor, 0.61, I think. So I think that sounds a little bit different from the rest of the factors.
Yeah, that's true. We could look at it in more detail, like with the specific subscale. But there are some, so what you mentioned with positive correlations with anxious attachment, there are some studies that find these with like your own interoceptive abilities and your own attachment. So that's interesting as well. But yeah, this is what we found here.
Carolina, this is super interesting. Just sadly, I know it's our fault because you've been asking so many questions, but just draw your attention to the time. Sorry, yeah. Just if there's another bit, but it's super interesting, and yeah, sorry, so many questions.
No worries.
It's great. Everyone's very interested.
Okay. Should I just finish quickly? I think I have like 3.
Yeah, sure. I mean, perfect. I mean, we're going to 1, so whatever you want, just to, yeah.
Okay, great. And then just continuing with the construct validity, there was also significant associations with parental reflective functioning. For the subscales that reflect more or that suggest more reflective parenting were positively correlated, and the pre-mentalizing subscale, which reflects which suggests less reflective parenting, was negatively correlated. And finally, for the children's psychological state, we found that the scores on the questionnaire predicted externalizing behaviors as well as internalizing behaviors and pro-social behavior. And here, just as a disclaimer, so the SDQ has 2 versions for different ages. And here I just took as an example, I think it's the one for 2 to 4-year-olds, but I had similar results for both versions. And then finally, the test-retest reliability, I used the ICC, which is the intra-class correlation coefficient, and it measures agreement between the scores at time 1 and at time 2. And we also had a significant correlation here. So it shows a good test-retest reliability. Okay, so just to conclude this kind of chapter, there is initial evidence supporting the reliability and validity of the questionnaire. Of course, further kind of studies would be great. And future studies can focus, for example, on addressing specific areas for improvement. Like I mentioned, the internal consistency of some of the scales, for example. But also they can focus on exploring age-specific differences in the factor structure and the item performance. So I didn't mention here, but I had, when I did exploratory factor analysis, a few differences in the baby version and the child version. So it would be interesting to explore more these. I think especially in the kind of 0 to 3-year-olds, where kind of development, there can be a lot of developmental kind of changes. And also further studies can strengthen the construct validity of the questionnaire, so they could examine differences, for example, between clinical and non-clinical populations, or they can incorporate other kind of type of assessments and not just self-report. So for example, behavioral tasks, interviews, and other approaches. And also, so the questionnaire was only for 0 to 10-year-olds. So further research could also evaluate the validity of the questionnaire for parents of adolescent children. Right, so ultimately, I think we hope that the questionnaire when it's used together with other behavioral and observational measures would contribute to or help us understand more about how parents notice and respond to the children's interoceptive signals, how they can support the children's development of interoception, self-regulation, and kind of emotion regulation abilities, and help identify any kind of individual differences in these processes. And I leave the preprint here again in case you want to see more details. What time is it? I think we're out of time. I had a few kind of slides on the methods of one of my other chapters, but I think we can leave it here because we won't have time, and maybe somebody has more questions.
I mean, I'd love it if you could just give us 1 minute on just with a description of what you did and the other things, because you looked at phasic changes in interoception as well, right?
So, okay, I'll go really quickly. So the aim here was to investigate if parents can identify cardiac signals in children just by looking at them. And also if this ability was influenced by other factors. So I'll quickly explain the task. So this task, I adapted it from an original experimental paradigm by Galvez Paul et al. And I adapted it to use with children. So in the task, basically, the participant will see 2 videos of the same child. And then in the middle, there is, so here, this is a flashing red square, which it's a cardiac feedback signal. So it will correspond to the heartbeat of the child in one of the two videos. And then the participant will have to choose to which of the two videos the heartbeat corresponds to. So it's a two alternative forced choice. And then they will rate their confidence as well. And I had two blocks for the task. So one neutral block and a stress block. To quickly recap, so the stress block, at first, I tried to use baby crying sounds to increase the heart rate in the participants, but this didn't work. So I changed the manipulation. Instead of being kind of a more affective one, I used a more physiological one. So I had participants do simple exercises like jogging on the spot and things like this to increase their heart rate. And we did this for one of the blocks. So this is the overall procedure. So basically, we had the participants, we explained the instructions. We used the Embrace Plus smartwatch to measure their heart rate. So we put this on at the beginning and we do some kind of baseline ratings. Then the participant completes the task, which the figure, the block structure is showing kind of the structure of the task. So it's two blocks and they were counterbalanced, the neutral and the stress block. And they complete 96 trials in total. In these 96 trials, half of them are of their own child and half of them are of an unfamiliar child. And for a subset of the sample, I also did another, like an extra block with a familiar child. So they had their own, a familiar child, and an unfamiliar child. And so that's basically the task. And I also have a few slides explaining how the stimuli were created. So how did the recordings with the children, but I don't know if you want me to go into.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
detail.
Carolina. We've quite a few of us have got places to go, unfortunately, on the thing. Can you send them round? Because it'll be really interesting. And have you got the results from all this too?
I'm still analyzing these results.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah.
Do send those round. I'd really love to hear it. Okay. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. Let's give Carolina a round of applause then. Well done.
Thank you.
That was really great. We really appreciate the time. Listen, can you just send the slides around and then we'll finish the ones that we didn't get to?
Yes,
that'd be
I'll
great.
send the slides around.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you very much
Lovely.
for having
And
me.
if anyone's got any more questions, then if they don't mind, we'll just pop them through to me by email. That'd be great.
Yes,
Yeah.
feel free to
Lovely.
email me as well.
Great. Lovely. All right, then. Really, really appreciate you taking the time, Carolina. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.